Well, welcome once again to the Voice of Camp Nathanael, coming at you right here on the campus of Camp Nathanael. Stephen Bell, and with me is...
Lee Sharp.
I don't have an adjective for you today, man. I'm sorry.
Not today. Well, we're a little bit too busy right now.
It is a little busy. I'm getting over jet lag coming back. I got to go to the Grand Canyon, man, for an anniversary trip with my wife.
How was it?
It was big.
You were telling me a story about a helicopter.
The incredible thing about the camp about the Camp Nathanael. Yeah, we're going to get to Camp Nathanael here in a second. A lot of incredible things there. The incredible thing about the Grand Canyon is when you're looking at it, just know that it's like so much bigger than what it looks like, because we were looking over into the Grand Canyon and it looks like it goes on forever, and we start hearing a helicopter. And so we're looking up to try to see where this helicopter is coming from, because they give tours all the time.
Gotcha.
And then about that time, we look down and you can see like the Colorado River. But then you notice this real tiny, almost little speck that's moving. And that is a helicopter, Lee. That's a helicopter carrying multiple human beings. And that just blew my mind as to how big this thing was. And so you get to stand in awe of the handiwork of God, and it's a moment of worship. It really is. It's really cool. Hey, check this out. We've got a guest in the studio here in a second we're going to get to, and we're excited about these next two episodes that's going to take us through the month of June. But hey, it is June 1st. And we're right in the middle. Orientation has begun for our summer missionaries. They arrived on campus, a lot of them, for the most part, most of them yesterday. Yeah. And man, we are excited because we are getting ready to bust into summer camp season. It is officially upon us, and we're excited because in July we're going to have some of our summer missionaries on the podcast talking to them about their experiences and stuff like that. It's going to be great.
The perspectives and the things that God's been teaching them.
That's right. That's right. So yeah, man, we're right in the middle of it. So those of you who have been praying for ministries here at camp, continue, because we're going to be getting kids on campus here just in the next couple of days with day camp coming up. Yeah, it's going to be great.
We're really excited about day camp. We're recording this a little bit ahead of time, so we're not 100% if there are still spots available at day camp. But if you're listening to this and you've got a 1st through 3rd grader and you think, maybe day camp might have a spot, check with us.
That's right. Call us here at the office, 606-251-3231, or you can go online, campnathanael.org/daycamp, and see if there's spots still available.
Yeah.
Get your kids in there. Those who have finished the 1st through the 3rd grade, available to them.
And then we've got the rest of camp coming up right after that with grade school week with 4th and 5th graders, and then middle school with 6th through 8th, and then high school and family camp. And it's gotten slightly busy. There's going to be a lot happening.
Awesome. Hey, now let's get into what we're going to talk about today, because this is an exciting episode. Back in February, we pulled some of the old reels of the Voice of Camp Nathanael all the way back. I think the earliest we had was it was in the 1960s that we were pulling stuff back from, and got some audio there. So we figured, you know what? Why rely on reels? All right. Why rely on reels when we have a guru? All right, we have someone who can bring us up to speed on all things camp, because this guy has been just a staple of this ministry. God has used him in a great way. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the podcast, Mr. Roy Hodson.
Well, it's a pleasure to be on the Voice of Camp Nathanael. It's been a while since I've been on that program.
You've had your time spent on the Voice of Camp Nathanael, man.
Just one little quick historical note in relationship to the Voice of Camp Nathanael, that I had a copy, and I think it was upstairs in the radio room at one time, which was actually a copper fiber type recording of some of the very earliest Voice of Camp Nathanael, which actually began in the 1940s.
That's the amazing part, because of all the ministries outside of like summer camp itself, Voice of Camp Nathanael may be the longest running ministry outside of summer camp. Am I right on that or not?
At least the trademark name is.
Yeah, the trademark.
But yes, in fact, the Voice of Camp Nathanael, within a week of WKIC and Hazard coming on the air as an AM station somewhere in the late 40s, they had a program that ran continuously every Saturday for up until the 2000s.
That's incredible.
And then it went to a 5-minute program 5 days a week.
Right.
And the folks there at WSGS now, they were the ones that told me that was the longest continuous running program that they had at that point.
Wow.
And they would go into a live studio for much of it until I guess technology caught up with Camp Nathanael or something. And they started recording it. But
and now we've transitioned, you know, as time progresses and different media outlets become available, we've transitioned to podcast form and now we're so appreciative of the way this ministry has went out over the years, but now we get the opportunity to go to a worldwide audience. Potentially. You can listen to the voice of Camp Nathanael no matter where you are, and there's missionaries all over the world that can even tune in and hear what's going on at Camp Nathanael. It's pretty amazing what God's done. Well, guys, listen, we are here with Roy Hodson, who has served as a missionary here at Camp Nathanael for many years, and we may get into all of that, but we asked Roy to come in. Why, Lee? Why did we ask Roy to come in?
We wanted to get a little bit of history.
We did. We've done some historical episodes already, but we were like, you know what we need to do is we need to get. I've already called you the guru. We'll call you the camp historian. We'll go down that line.
And you're just trying to get me before my memory slips. Right?
Get him in now, guys. Let's go.
That's right. Get this digital copy.
Well, Roy, listen, we appreciate you coming in, man. And so we're going to kind of relive kind of the history of Camp Nathanael over these next two episodes. And so here we are, June 1st, 2024. And camp is in its 92nd, going on maybe 93rd year, somewhere through there. 92nd year, because we're talking back in 1932. Right. All right. So, Roy, can you take us back that far?
Well, only because had the privilege, my wife Debbie and I, and those of my generation, the Toners, the Newells, the Halls, the Plitts, we had the opportunity of working alongside what I came to call the originals. Those men and women who came in the 30s, early 40s, and built what Camp Nathanael and Scripture Memory Mountain Mission. And so, yes, it began in the fall of 1932. The first actual summer camp was not until the summer of 33. Gotcha. But for whatever reason, they always said 1932. So, but so yeah, whatever that math works out to be, I think you said 93 years.
92 to 93, somewhere through there. Yeah.
So. I've been involved since the 40th anniversary, so there you go. That gives you my first summer here was the 40th anniversary.
Your first summer here would have, so that means 1972, right?
Well,
roughly.
Actually, I'm correct. 71 was the first summer.
Okay,
so my picture got in the 40th anniversary.
It's funny because when we did these programs back in February, and we were pulling from some of the old reels, we actually got a clip of Garland Franklin speaking at the 40th anniversary of Camp Nathanael during Family Bible Conference. So it was right around that same time then.
Right. We were summer staff for 3 summers.
Okay.
From 71 to 73, and then came back full time in 1974. So, and we've been here ever since.
Awesome.
Or been in the area ever since. So yeah, it began in the fall of 1932, but it really goes back further than that. Garland Franklin, who is our founding director, he grew up here in Knott County on Caney. He's related to some of the Franklins that are here in the county, not just Rick, who is his grandson, but there's others. And but then as a teenager, his family moved to Michigan to go to high school. He went to high school there and went on to college at Wheaton College in Illinois, a Christian college. And he was pastoring a little church, a little Bible church near Wheaton. And he read in the Sunday School Times that I think the number was 50 or 60,000 students, children, were living in the Appalachian Mountains that had not heard the gospel. And he turned to his wife, Eleanor, and he said, how can I be up here in suburban Chicago and my own people haven't heard the gospel? So he uprooted himself and his wife, who was from Michigan. That's where her roots were. Yeah. And I don't know that they'd ever been to Eastern Kentucky, since they'd been married. Anyway, and I think they had 2 sons at the time, 2 young sons. Uprooted them and moved to Hyden, Kentucky in 1932. Yep. When they got there, they discovered that there were already 4 or 5 single women doing missionary work, based out of Perry and Leslie County, primarily Leslie County. So Mr. Franklin came and became the pastor of what's called Central Presbyterian Church, which is the Presbyterian church in Hyden, and met a lady named Ruth Houston. Ruth Houston had arrived in 1922 or 3, somewhere in that time. But Ruth Houston, she was a millionaire in the 20s. Her family were millionaires in the 20s. She was a debutante out of suburban Philadelphia. God got a hold of her life, and she came to Kentucky. And she lived there in Hyden, had Bible studies and different things. Well, when Mr. Franklin came with this vision of reaching school children, she, along with these other 4 ladies, came together, and they organized what became Scripture Memory Mountain Mission. So it was 7 people, 1 man, and 6 women.
Wow.
And I have always said, and I stand by it even today, that the ministry in the tough places of the world, including Eastern Kentucky, in the 30s and 40s, this was a third world, by our third world standards today. It was. It was very rural. People literally lived in dirt floor homes, log cabins. It was very third world. But these women came and gave their lives here, and they're the foundation of this ministry.
Yeah, for sure.
And sadly, to the male Christian population of those generations, they left it up to them. And thankfully, that has changed the demographics of this ministry as well as other ministries. But there was a time when there was only a handful of men in Scripture Memory Mountain Mission and a whole host of ladies.
I'll tell you something that hasn't changed much in the demographic, though, is the amount of people from Michigan that are involved at Camp Nathanael, too. So we always give our Michigan folk a hard time.
Well, I'm all on board for that.
Yes, absolutely.
But so they organized the ministry and began that fall visiting schools there in Leslie County primarily. And back in those days, every little community had a 1 or 2 room school.
Yeah.
So there was probably, I'm kind of guessing, probably there was 30 or maybe up to 50 schools in just Leslie County, scattered among the different hollers. And they would go on a rotation by horseback primarily because there were no real roads. And they had a circuit. They would load up and they'd ride out a day's journey visiting schools along the way. And then they'd stay overnight in a mountain home that they'd prearranged, the early Airbnb. But these folks, even though they didn't have much, they would welcome that person in, give them the best they had. And to their credit, our staff, mission staff, were thankful. And then they would go from that home and ride a day's circuit coming back toward Hyden by horseback, stopping along the way with different teaching materials strapped to their horse. And they get off, unload, set up, do their teaching, and then move on to the next school. Well, as an incentive, they began to encourage people to memorize Bible verses.
Okay.
Therefore, Scripture Memory Mountain Mission. And to promote that, they said, we will give you some awards along the way. Does this sound familiar? If you will do so many verses, we'll get this. So many verses, you get that. Well, some of the mountain kids really took to that. And at the end of the first year, I think they had 40 students that had completed all the verse things that they had offered. And the 2 awards were, similar to what is still today, there was a free Bible and a week at camp. The only problem was Scripture Memory Mountain Mission didn't have any Bibles, and they didn't have a camp. Talk about launching on faith.
I was getting ready to say that's some motivation right there to get things done, isn't it?
And so one of the early classic miracles that God did, they were praying because they needed to give the Bibles out at the end of school year.
Yeah.
And so they were praying, God, what are we going to do? And they needed these 40-some Bibles. Well, the story goes from Mr. Franklin that the very this was in the 30s, Depression, and they were changing the monetary system from a gold-based monetary system to the Federal Reserve. We can get into the politics of that, but we won't.
All right.
And so they were saying there was only a certain window to turn in gold coins for the full value and turn it into dollars. The final day that you were eligible to do that, Mr. Franklin and Mrs. Franklin got in the mail a little box that had $5 gold pieces in it, which he rushed to the bank there in Hyden, converted to dollars, and that's what they used to buy those first Bibles.
Wow.
That's incredible.
So, then they had what are we going to do for camp?
Yeah.
So they had the church there in Hyden, and Miss Houston had built a home just across the street there in Hyden from it. So that first year, they had their first camp on the property of Central Presbyterian Church in Hyden. The girls slept on Miss Houston's porch. The guys slept in a tent. The community brought in meals, and they traded out chickens and different things like this. And I think if I'm remember correctly, one of the things that they provided was they gave every student an orange, because an orange was almost like gold. Nobody ever saw them because they couldn't afford them.
Yeah, wow.
And Miss Houston wanted to make sure that they all got an orange. So they had this first camp. And
you said they had about 40 kids?
40 kids in that first camp.
And I'm trying to picture even like Miss Houston there and Garland as they're in the middle of that first camp and things are coming together in this very strange, what maybe appear to be a very strange way. I just wondered when when they were laying themselves down at night to go to sleep, like what was running through, and it's one of those things where God is doing so much in this story that we don't always see God in the moment.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering if they were picking up on that and be like, this is amazing. Like this shouldn't be happening by some, the fact that it is
that core group. And then those that came after, the Elsie Pfisters and the Minnie Joys and the Alice Swansons and the Helen Gimberlings, I mean, they put me to shame as far as their faith. They believed if they were doing what God had for them to do, God would provide it in some way. And that's how they lived. And some people used to give Miss Houston a hard time because she was wealthy. But she never intercepted God in providing. And by that, I mean, she didn't just open up her checkbook and cover the costs.
Yeah.
She stepped back and was able to see and have other people see God providing, not some bankroll from a family in Pennsylvania.
Yeah.
And that has always, to me, been the spirit of this ministry, is trusting God rather than looking at people.
Yeah.
And
you can see that. You can certainly see that throughout the years, and especially now with the facilities that camp has, and we'll get into that, and stuff down the line. But wow, do you know? And this is just a question that popped into my mind when we were talking about this. Do you know roughly how many verses these 40 kids would have had to memorize that first year of camp? Any idea?
I'm pretty sure it was 200.
Wow.
Which was the same basic 200 that carried on until the 60s when the transition went to Bible lessons.
Okay.
Which came out of a Canadian Sunday school ministry. But yeah, it was 200 verses. I think it was 5 for a gospel, another 20 for a New Testament, and then you got something else, and then it was 75 for a Bible, and then another 100 to go to camp.
Wow.
And
that was within the year.
Correct.
That was memorizing that within that year of school. Correct. Okay. Yep.
And with the recognition that many of those kids were doing that in homes that had no electricity.
Right.
That had no, they had to help mom and dad in the garden. They had to carry water. They had to do all the things that was necessary to live in that time. But so it was quite an accomplishment. I guess the word got back because the next year, as they began, I think they spread into Perry County the next year. All of these things done with the permission of obviously the school authorities, which were very supportive. Mm-hmm. The next year, as spring rolled around, Lee, they had more than they could handle on the church grounds of Central Presbyterian Church. So this would have been the summer of 1934, or the spring. And Mr. Franklin at the time had begun to travel this region preaching and doing pulpit supply and different things. And that particular spring, he was on his way from Hyden, where they lived, to Pippa Passes, to the Caney School. Alice was now Alice Lloyd, to speak in a chapel. And as he was driving on what is 550 now, and all of you that are familiar with that road, as you come to the original entrance, there's a long straight stretch. Well, as he was driving along, praying about what they were going to do this summer, his eyes glanced to the right, and he looked, and of course the trees were all, back then they kept a lot of that tree growth cut down. And so you could see camp much more clearly, the property from the highway. So he looked over here, and what he spotted was an overgrown pasture full of briars, full of weeds, but he saw flat land.
Yeah.
And he said, God just told me that day going to Caney, that's the next place. They had named it. Well, no, they hadn't named the camp at that point. That was the next place. So I don't know if it was that day or within a week or so, he began to make inquiries to who owned it. And a Mrs. Mosley owned this farm, the Mosley Farm, and had her cabin over where the nature cabin is now.
Now, this was in 1934?
This would be 1934.
Okay, yep.
1934. And so he makes inquiry. Somehow he makes contact with her. I'm not exactly sure how. And she agreed to rent the property to them. It was a source of income for her. She'd been widowed. I think her husband had died in the Spanish-American War. And so she was widowed. But he had to get the other, remember he had 6 women.
He's got to convince.
That he had to convince.
That this is a good idea. As he's driving down the road and he says, I saw this flat piece of land that's covered in partial forest.
He brings them in here, and there was no road. At that point, the only way in that I can remember ever seeing a picture was literally a log bridge across Troublesome Creek.
Oh, wow.
Closer to where the Emelina Post Office is.
Yeah, okay.
Right in that area there by the Camp Bridge.
Okay.
There's an old house that lives right there where one of the Morgan family lived at that time. And so they came across this log bridge, walked up the hill. There was no road, so they went up.
Right.
If you know that bank, they came up that bank.
Oh, my.
And walked in here. And I'll never forget him telling me this story. He got them down here in this overgrown briar patch, right?
Yeah.
There was no such thing as synthetic materials. Nylons did not exist. But these women all had on silk stockings.
Oh, my.
So they were down here in this briar patch, and they all were starting to complain about their stockings, their silk stockings being ruined by these briars.
They're getting torn to pieces here.
and so he told me, he said, Roy, he said, I looked straight up, and I said, God, if you can help me get these ladies out of here without snagging one more stocking, I know I can convince them that this is the place.
This is the place. That was it right there.
So a man of faith, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And apparently he did, because they did agree. And I guess I don't know how they got the area cleared, but they did enough. They got surplus Army tents, probably First World War type tents, actually, because the Second World War hadn't happened yet. And they set up a small camp here on the property.
Now, we do have some of those pictures.
Right.
Now, those are even down in the dining hall right now on the wall, I believe, because I remember the tents being set up. And
tents, they had, well, the first summer they didn't have wooden platforms. They just slept on the ground and swam in the creek.
Yeah.
Bathed in the creek. They drove to Hindman for fresh water. Mrs. Mosley had a well, which we sought to restore. over there. It's got its own little history. Just a sidebar, a man by the name of Shade Combs, who was actually, I think, the father-in-law or related to Mrs. Mosley in some way. Anyway, he owned all of this part of Knott County at one time in the land patent. Well, he'd gotten into a feud with some people here in the county, and he was watering his horse at that well over there on that bottom near the handicraft building now.
Okay.
And he was bushwhacked from the hill up where Alaska is, and jumped on his horse and rode downstream on Troublesome down, not as far as where we live, and died on the guy's front porch.
Wow.
But that's just a little side tidbit there.
Yeah, still.
But anyway, so they convinced Mrs. Mosley agreed to cook for them, and so she had her regular cabin, and then she had what was called a summer kitchen. A lot of places homes had that, so they would cook in this summer kitchen, so they didn't heat their cabin up in the heat of the summer.
And you said, and we were talking before we went on the air, that summer kitchen was where?
It would have been in the bottom there. The nature cabin's up on the rise. That's where the original cabin was.
So it would be where the new handcraft building
Correct.
is. I say new as in, built
right.
the past few years, but
Correct.
Okay.
It was somewhere in that bottom. The kids would come through. They'd put some, and I think there are some pictures. They put a tarp to give some shade. They heated their water over an open fire.
That picture is down in the dining hall.
Wow.
And then the kids sat under another tarp for shade when they ate. And then they used metal plates, metal cups. They washed them all in this scalding water. And then they said after every meal, it was like you could hear this symphony of banging plates, because what they would do, they would make them bang them on a rock to get the water out from underneath where the metal had been lipped over from the top to get the water so they didn't rust.
Yeah.
So,
wow.
So that's those early years. And then just to wrap this part up, 2 years later, in 1936, Mrs. Mosley was having a struggle paying for her property taxes. And so in the conversation, the ministry agreed to buy 66 acres from Mrs. Mosley, and I think it was $5,000, which was a lot of money in 1936, but not a lot of money.
Right.
So they got 66 acres, which it consisted of basically not where the nature cabin is now. That part was not acquired till much, much later. But where Old House Branch comes down from where the cabin side of the Old House Branch and the bottom here.
So right where our chapel is, where we are currently in right now,
Correct.
to the bottom,
down to where the picnic shelter is now, where the original swimming pool was.
Basically before the bridge takes us over to the new property, which we'll kind of get into and stuff like that. Yeah. Well, hey, listen, we're gonna break right here. We've talked about the early years of Camp Nathanael, and we may stretch this into more than 2 episodes here, guys.
You're leaving them on a cliffhanger.
Well, it's a good. We're right at the time frame of where we need to be. So we've went from the beginning of Scripture Memory Mountain Mission. Now we're up to, I think we've covered about 2 or 3 years maybe in our first episode here in 30 minutes. And so, but Roy, we're looking forward to continuing to get into this, and we'll pick back up on it in here in just a couple of weeks. Lee, anything before we head out here?
With summer camp coming up.
Yeah.
Guys,
I mean, like soon.
Like very, very soon.
There's still time to get in, by the way.
If you are not already signed up, please get onto campnathaniel.org and
/paycamper
and get signed up now.
That's right. You can still sign up to spend a week of your summer here at Camp Nathanael. So make sure you do that. Guys, we will be back here June the 15th to continue our discussion with Mr. Roy Hodson and the history of Camp Nathanael and Scripture Memory Mountain Mission right here on the Voice of Camp Nathanael. Have a good week, man. Let's get summer rolling, and we'll be back here in a couple of weeks.
Yeah.
All right. Have a great week, guys.